Hey everyone, welcome back. I've got another wild one for you today while we build in our Minecraft world. Sometimes the best stories are the ones where someone's arrogance becomes their downfall, and trust me, this one delivers. Before we dive in, I just want to give a huge shout out to everyone who's been showing up, commenting, and supporting this channel. Seriously, thank you. Your energy keeps this community going. So our story starts in a typical corporate office where one person thought they had all the power. They spent months making someone else's life miserable, spreading rumors, sabotaging projects, playing mind games in meetings. Classic workplace bully behavior, the kind that makes you want to reach through the screen and intervene. But patience, as you'll see, can be the deadliest weapon. Because while this bully was busy destroying someone's career, they forgot that cameras see everything. And when I say everything went public, I mean the entire internet got front row seats to their downfall. I started working at this mid-sized corporate office about 2 years ago, and from literally day one, Jenna had it out for me. I still don't know what I did to set her off. Maybe it was because I got hired for a role she wanted her friend to have. Maybe it was because I didn't laugh at her jokes during the team lunch on my first day. Honestly, I have no idea. But whatever the reason, she decided I was her new project, and not in a good way. Jenna was a senior manager in operations, which meant she had just enough power to make my life miserable, but not enough oversight to get caught doing it. At first, it was small things. She'd forget to CC me on important emails, then act shocked when I didn't know about last-minute changes. She'd schedule meetings during my lunch break and make passive-aggressive comments when I asked to reschedule. Little digs about my outfits, my ideas, my work ethic. The kind of stuff that sounds petty when you say it out loud, but grinds you down over time. Then it escalated. She started spreading rumors that I was difficult to work with, that I missed deadlines, that I talked badly about other team members behind their backs. None of it was true, but Jenna had been there for 8 years. People trusted her. I was the new person. So when she'd make these comments in passing, people believed her. I could feel the shift. Co-workers who used to chat with me at the coffee machine started avoiding eye contact. I stopped getting invited to after-work drinks. My manager started questioning my work more closely, asking if I needed help managing my time. I tried to document everything. I kept records of emails, noted down things she said in meetings, even started recording our one-on-ones on my phone after she claimed I agreed to take on extra work I never agreed to. But it felt like I was fighting a ghost. Every time I brought something up to HR, Jenna had a perfectly reasonable explanation. She was just trying to help me improve. She didn't realize I felt targeted. She thought we had a great working relationship. You almost have to admire the audacity. Then came the breaking point. I was working on this massive project, a client pitch that could have brought in serious revenue for the company. I'd been prepping for weeks. The presentation was flawless. I had data, mock-ups, testimonials, everything. The night before the pitch, I stayed late to do a final run-through. When I left, everything was saved on the shared drive and backed up on my laptop. The next morning, I got to the office early, ready to crush it. I opened the file to do one last review, and my entire presentation was gone. Not just gone, replaced with a half-finished version from 2 weeks prior. All my updates, all my revisions, completely wiped. I panicked, I checked my backup, also corrupted. I tried to recover previous versions from the shared drive. Nothing. Someone had deliberately deleted my work and covered their tracks. I had to go into that meeting and present a subpar pitch with outdated information. The clients were unimpressed, my manager was furious, and Jenna, sitting in the back of the room, had this tiny smile on her face. I knew it was her. I couldn't prove it, but I knew. That's when everything unraveled. 2 days later, I got called into HR. Jenna had filed a formal complaint claiming I'd stolen company property. Specifically, she said I'd taken a company laptop home without authorization and had been using it for personal freelance work. I was stunned. I didn't even have a company laptop. I used a desktop at my desk like everyone else. But when they searched my desk, guess what they found? A company-issued laptop hidden in the back of my bottom drawer with files on it that allegedly showed I'd been doing side work on company time. I tried to explain that I had no idea how it got there, that someone must have planted it. But it sounded insane. Why would anyone do that? HR didn't believe me. My manager didn't believe me. I was suspended immediately pending investigation, and 3 days later I was fired for theft and misuse of company resources. I was devastated. I'd lost my job, My reputation was destroyed, and I had no way to defend myself. I couldn't even use anyone from that office as a reference. I went home, spent a week in sweatpants eating ice cream and spiraling, and started applying for jobs in a complete fog of humiliation and rage. Here's where it gets absurd. 2 weeks after I was fired, I woke up to 47 text messages. Friends, former co-workers, even my mum had sent me links to the same Twitter thread. Someone with an anonymous account had uploaded security footage from the office. Not just any footage, crystal clear video of Jenna, after hours using a key to unlock my desk drawer and placing a laptop inside. The timestamp showed it was the night before HR searched my desk. The video went absolutely viral. We're talking hundreds of thousands of views in the first few hours. People were tagging the company, tagging news outlets, posting it on LinkedIn with captions like, "This is what workplace harassment looks like." The comments were ruthless. People dug into Jenna's history and found other employees who'd left the company under weird circumstances. Someone found a Glassdoor review from 2 years ago describing a manager who sabotaged co-workers, and people connected the dots. The company went into full damage control mode. Within 48 hours, they were drowning in bad press. Articles were being written. Their stock dipped. Clients were asking questions. The CEO released a statement saying they took workplace integrity seriously and were conducting a thorough investigation. But the internet had already decided. The footage didn't lie. 3 days after the video went viral, I got a call from the company's head of HR. Not my old HR rep, the actual head. She apologized profusely and asked if I'd be willing to come in for a meeting. I almost said no, almost told them to shove it, but I was curious, and honestly, I wanted to see them squirm. I went in, and they offered me my job back. Not just my job, a promotion, a raise, a public apology that would be sent to the entire company. They wanted me to sign an NDA in exchange for a settlement, but my lawyer advised against it until we knew more. Turns out Jenna had done this before, to at least 3 other employees over the years. The company had quietly paid them off and moved her to different departments instead of firing her. But this time it was too public. They couldn't sweep it under the rug. Jenna was terminated immediately. No severance, no reference. And because the footage showed premeditated misconduct, she couldn't even claim unemployment. Her LinkedIn was flooded with comments. She tried to scrub her online presence, but the internet is forever. I heard through the grapevine that she's essentially unemployable in our industry now. No one will touch her. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you are watching from in the comments below. Now, where were we? Oh right, Jenna's career was in ruins, and I was savoring every second of my vindication. I went back to work a month later. The vibe was completely different. People apologized, some genuinely, some because they were worried I'd sue. My new manager bent over backward to make sure I felt supported. I got assigned to better projects. Jenna's old office was turned into a wellness room, which felt like poetic justice in the pettiest way possible. And the person who leaked the footage? Still anonymous. I have my theories. Maybe it was someone in IT who'd seen Jenna pull this before. Maybe it was a co-worker who felt guilty for not standing up for me. I'll probably never know, but whoever they are, they gave me my life back. I still work there. I got another promotion 6 months ago, and every time I walk past that wellness room, I think about Jenna and smile. She wanted to destroy me, and instead she destroyed herself. They basically dug their own grave and tripped into it. But what happens when your attempt at public revenge lands you behind bars instead? I should have seen the signs earlier, but when you trust someone completely, you explain away the little inconsistencies. The late nights at the office, the sudden interest in going to the gym, the way he'd angle his phone away from me when texting. Classic signs, right? But I convinced myself I was being paranoid, that our marriage was solid, that he loved me. Then I found the hotel receipts in his jacket pocket while doing laundry. 4 different hotels over the past 2 months, all local, all charged to his personal credit card, not the business one. My hands were shaking as I went through his phone that night while he was in the shower. I know, invasion of privacy and all that, but at that point I needed to know. The texts were right there, months of them. Her name was Vanessa. She worked in his department. The messages were graphic, intimate, planning their next meetup. They had pet names for each other. He told her things he'd never said to me. My stomach turned as I screenshot everything, sent it all to myself, then deleted the sent messages from his phone. He never noticed. For 3 days I sat on this information, barely eating, barely sleeping, while he acted completely normal. Kissed me goodbye each morning, asked about my day, talked about our upcoming vacation like nothing was wrong. The audacity was suffocating. I wanted to scream at him, throw things, demand answers. But a different plan started forming in my head. See, his company's annual gala was happening that weekend. Big fancy event, all the executives and their spouses, awards ceremony, the whole production. And my husband was receiving the Outstanding Leadership Award. They'd announced it weeks ago. He was so proud. That's when the idea hit me. Why confront him privately when I could expose him publicly? Why let him control the narrative when I had all the evidence? I spent the next 2 days in a blur of preparation. I hired a videographer under the guise of wanting to capture his big moment. I created a slideshow, carefully arranging screenshots of his texts with Vanessa, photos of hotel receipts, even a map showing the locations of all their meetups. I timed it perfectly to the second. My plan was simple: wait until he was called to the stage for his award, then play my slideshow on the main projector for everyone to see. 200 people, his boss, his colleagues, his mistress, who I'd confirmed would be there. Everyone would know what kind of man he really was. The night of the gala arrived and I got ready like it was any other event. Hair done, makeup perfect, wearing the dress he'd bought me for our anniversary. He kept complimenting me, saying how lucky he was. I smiled and thanked him while my laptop sat in my bag, with everything ready to go. We arrived at the venue, this gorgeous ballroom with crystal chandeliers and round tables with white linens. I recognized faces from previous company events. Vanessa was there, looking stunning in a red dress, carefully avoiding eye contact with my husband in public. The professionalism was almost impressive. Dinner was served. I barely touched my food. My husband chatted with colleagues, completely relaxed, completely unaware. The awards portion began. 3 other people received recognition first. Then came the moment. The CEO took the microphone and began talking about outstanding leadership, dedication, and integrity. That word, integrity, almost made me laugh out loud. They called my husband's name. Everyone applauded. He stood up, kissed my cheek, and walked toward the stage, looking so proud, so accomplished. I waited until he reached the podium, until the applause died down, until he started his acceptance speech, thanking the company and his loving wife. That's when I stood up, walked calmly to the AV table where the videographer I'd hired was stationed, and connected my laptop to the projector system. The technical guy looked confused, but I smiled and said I had a special tribute video for my husband. He stepped aside. I hit play. The screen went black for a second. Then the first text message appeared, blown up huge for everyone to see. And that's when everything went sideways, in a way I never could have predicted. Security was on me in seconds. 2 large men in suits grabbed my arms before the second slide could even load. I tried to protest, tried to explain, but they were dragging me away from the laptop. People were standing up, confused, talking loudly. My husband was frozen on stage, his face pale. Then the police arrived. Actual police officers. One of them pulled out handcuffs and started reading me my rights. Disorderly conduct. Violation of a restraining order. I remember screaming that there was no restraining order, that this was insane, that I was exposing a cheater. The officer just kept talking, kept cuffing me. My husband walked over, and I'll never forget the look on his face. Concerned, worried, sympathetic. He looked at the officers and said quietly that he'd filed an emergency restraining order that morning because his wife had become unstable, that he was worried she might do something erratic. The whole thing felt like an out-of-body experience. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't real, but the handcuffs were very real. The whispers from 200 people watching were very real. Security escorted me out through the ballroom while everyone stared. Some people looked shocked, others looked sympathetic toward my husband. Vanessa had her hand over her mouth, playing concerned mistress perfectly. The police took me to the station. I spent the entire night in a holding cell, still wearing my anniversary dress, mascara running down my face. He'd planned this. That's what made it so much worse. He'd filed a restraining order that very morning, claiming I'd been behaving erratically, making threats, showing signs of instability. All lies, complete fabrication, but he'd documented everything carefully. Probably with Vanessa's help. Texts to himself acting concerned about my mental health. A call to his doctor asking for advice about a spouse acting paranoid. He'd built a narrative over weeks that I was becoming unhinged, and the restraining order was filed just hours before the gala. The timing was surgical. He knew I'd found out somehow. He knew I'd try to expose him, and he made sure that when I did, I'd look like the crazy one. They released me the next morning after my lawyer posted bail. Bail. For trying to expose my cheating husband. The charges included violating a restraining order I didn't know existed and disrupting a private event. My lawyer, Patricia, was furious but strategic. She immediately started gathering evidence that the restraining order was filed in bad faith, that it was a preemptive strike to silence me and control the narrative. We pulled my phone records showing his affair. We got statements from the hotel staff. We found the metadata on the photos showing they were taken before the restraining order was filed. Meanwhile, my husband played the victim flawlessly. He sent concerned emails to friends and family saying he was worried about me, that he hoped I'd get the help I needed. He stayed at a hotel claiming he feared for his safety. Vanessa posted cryptic messages on social media about supporting friends through difficult times. The company released a statement expressing concern for all parties involved. Everyone bought his performance. I was the unstable wife. He was the concerned husband dealing with a spouse in crisis. Patricia filed motions to dismiss based on fraudulent restraining order procurement. We documented the timeline showing he filed it the same day as the gala, that there was no prior history of threats or instability, that this was clearly retaliation for discovering his affair. The judge ordered a hearing. My husband showed up with his own lawyer, still playing concerned and hurt. But Patricia destroyed his narrative piece by piece. She presented the affair evidence. She showed the restraining order was filed within hours of him likely realizing I knew. She brought up his company's morality clause and how public exposure of an affair would affect his career. The judge saw through it. You could see it on her face when Patricia laid out the timeline. The restraining order was dismissed. The charges against me were dropped. And here's the beautiful part. Because he'd filed a fraudulent protective order and weaponized the legal system against me, my lawyer was able to use all of that in our divorce proceedings. His affair, his manipulation, his attempt to have me arrested to cover his tracks, all of it became part of the record. The divorce is still ongoing, but his reputation is destroyed. Word got out about what really happened that night. His company quietly asked him to resign after the evidence of his affair became impossible to ignore. Vanessa transferred to a different department and reportedly won't speak to him anymore. Turns out being publicly exposed as someone who manipulates the legal system isn't great for relationships. His family, who initially believed his concerned husband act, eventually saw the evidence and stopped taking his calls. I'm rebuilding my life now. Patricia's confident we'll get a favorable settlement given his behavior. The night in jail was humiliating and traumatic, but in a twisted way, his overreaction proved everything. If he'd just been a regular cheater, I might have exposed him and moved on. Instead, he weaponized the police and courts against me, and that became the smoking gun that proved his guilt more than any slideshow ever could. At least I had evidence to fight back with, unlike the person in our next story, who found something they definitely weren't supposed to see. Tom and I had been together for 4 years when he proposed. It was perfect, exactly what I'd imagined. We started planning the wedding immediately, and honestly, those first few months of being engaged felt like the happiest time of my life. We'd picked a venue, chosen our colors, started working on the guest list. Everything was falling into place. We were that couple that everyone said was meant to be. Our families loved each other. Our friends constantly told us how lucky we were to have found our person. I worked from home most days, and Tom traveled for work pretty frequently. Sales job, lots of client meetings, conferences, that kind of thing. I never questioned it. Why would I? We talked every night when he was away. He'd send me photos of boring hotel rooms and complain about airplane food. He seemed miserable without me, which I know sounds codependent, but it felt romantic at the time. We had complete trust, or at least I thought we did. One Tuesday afternoon, I was working on our wedding guest list, and my laptop died mid-edit. The charger had finally given up after years of abuse, and I needed to order a new one. But in the meantime, I needed to finish this list, because our invitations were being printed that week. Tom was working from home that day, upstairs in his office, so I knocked and asked if I could borrow his laptop for an hour. He barely looked up, said sure, and told me his password. No hesitation, no weird energy, just a casual yes like he had nothing to hide. I took his laptop downstairs, opened it up, and went to pull up the shared Google Doc with our guest list. But his file system was a mess, like truly chaotic, and I couldn't find the quick link I needed. So I started clicking through folders looking for documents. That's when I saw it, a folder labeled Backup 2024. It was tucked inside another folder, not hidden exactly, but not somewhere you'd accidentally click either. Something about it felt off. Maybe it was intuition, maybe it was just curiosity, but I opened it. There were hundreds of photos. At first I didn't understand what I was looking at. Pictures of Tom with a woman I'd never seen before. She was pretty, blonde, younger than me. They were at restaurants, on a beach, at what looked like a concert. My brain was trying to rationalize it. Maybe she's a coworker. Maybe this is from before we met. But then I saw a photo of them kissing, and my stomach dropped. I started scrolling faster, my hands shaking. There were intimate photos, the kind you take in private moments, photos of them in bed. And then I noticed the timestamps. Every single photo was recent, like terrifyingly recent. Some were from 2 weeks ago, some from last month, and the most recent ones, the ones that made me feel like I might actually throw up, were from the night before, literally less than 24 hours ago. Tom had told me he was working late at the office. These photos showed him and this woman at a nice restaurant, holding hands across the table, her laughing at something he said. I sat there staring at the screen for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few minutes. My whole body was numb. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This wasn't a drunken hookup, he regretted. This was a whole separate relationship, documented and ongoing, happening parallel to ours. I thought about all the times he'd been away for work, all the conferences and client dinners. How many of those were actually with her? I didn't even think about what to do next. I just walked upstairs with his laptop, pushed open his office door, and set it down on his desk with the folder still open. He looked up, confused at first, then his face went completely white when he saw what was on the screen. For a second, neither of us said anything. Then he started with the worst possible response. He said my name in this soft, pleading voice and reached for my hand. I pulled away and asked him who she was. He tried to minimize it at first, said it was complicated, that it wasn't what it looked like. I literally laughed, like a sharp, bitter laugh that surprised both of us. I told him it looked like he was dating someone else while planning a wedding with me. So unless he had a really creative explanation, that's exactly what it was. That's when he broke down, full tears, head in his hands, the whole performance. He confessed that her name was Rachel, that he'd been seeing her for a year, and then he said the line that I'll never forget as long as I live. He looked up at me with wet eyes and said he loved us both, that he didn't know how to choose, that he thought he could figure it out after the wedding. After the wedding. Like he was planning to marry me while actively dating someone else and just see how things shook out. The entitlement was almost impressive. I told him the wedding was off. He started begging, saying we could work through this, that he'd end things with Rachel, that I was the one he really wanted. I asked him if Rachel knew about me. He went quiet. That was my answer. This woman had no idea I existed. She probably thought she was in an exclusive relationship with him, maybe even thought she was the love of his life, while he was literally planning to marry someone else. I left the house with his laptop. He followed me to my car, still crying, still begging. I told him not to contact me and drove to my parents' house. My mum took one look at my face and knew something catastrophic had happened. I showed her the photos. She was livid. My dad wanted to go over there and confront Tom himself. Instead, I called his mum. That conversation was brutal. She was devastated, kept apologizing like it was somehow her fault she raised a son who could do this. Then I called off the wedding officially, contacted our venue, our caterer, everyone. But that wasn't even the worst part. I needed to find Rachel. She deserved to know the truth. I went through the photos until I found one where her face was clear and did a reverse image search. Found her Instagram within minutes. She had photos of Tom on there, recent ones with captions about date nights and how lucky she was. My heart broke for her. I sent her a DM with screenshots and a simple message explaining who I was and that Tom had been lying to both of us. She responded within an hour. She was in complete shock, thought I was lying at first, then called Tom, and he apparently confessed everything to her too. We ended up talking on the phone for 2 hours. Turns out Tom had told her he traveled for work constantly, which explained why she never questioned why he was unavailable so often. He'd created entire fictional business trips to explain away the time he spent with me. The level of deception was staggering. He'd maintained 2 complete relationships with calendars and stories and lies for a full year. Rachel and I were both furious, but we channeled it productively. We decided he didn't get to control the narrative or play victim. We wrote a joint post explaining what he'd done, included some of the evidence with faces blurred for privacy, and posted it to our social media accounts. We tagged mutual friends, including people from his work. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People were horrified. His reputation was destroyed overnight. And here's where it gets absurd. Rachel's uncle was Tom's boss. She'd never mentioned the connection to Tom because she didn't want to seem like she was name-dropping or using family connections. But when her uncle found out what Tom had done to his niece, he was livid. Tom was fired within the week, not just for the personal drama, but because the company had a morality clause and his behavior reflected poorly on their values. Losing his job meant he couldn't afford his apartment. Last I heard, he moved back in with his parents and was job hunting in a different city because no one in our industry would hire him after word spread. Rachel and I became unlikely friends through all of this. We'd meet for coffee sometimes and laugh about the absurdity of it all, how we'd both been so completely fooled. She's dating someone new now, someone who treats her well. I'm taking time to heal and figure out who I am outside of a relationship. The wedding I'd been planning never happened, but honestly, that folder saved me from marrying someone who would have kept lying for years. Finding it when I did was the worst thing that could have happened. Secrets have a way of surfacing at the worst possible moments, especially when they involve family. My dad died on a Tuesday, massive heart attack at his office, gone before the ambulance arrived. He was 58, healthy as far as we knew, no warning signs. One minute he was alive, the next he wasn't. The shock was devastating. My mum was inconsolable. My younger brother flew in from Seattle. We spent the next few days in that weird fog that comes with sudden loss, making arrangements, calling relatives, picking out a casket. Normal grief stuff, or so I thought. The funeral was scheduled for Saturday at a funeral home in our hometown. My dad had lived here his whole life, worked at the same engineering firm for 30 years, coached Little League, knew everyone. We expected a big turnout. What we didn't expect was for his entire secret life to walk through the door. I was standing near the entrance greeting people as they arrived. Co-workers, neighbors, old friends, everyone sharing condolences, telling stories about what a great man he was. My mum was sitting in the front row, staring at the casket, still in shock. Then this woman walked in, probably late 40s, well-dressed, crying. She walked straight toward me and I assumed she was a colleague or family friend. I reached out to shake her hand and she grabbed it, tears streaming down her face, and said my dad's name like she knew him intimately. Before I could respond, a younger woman appeared behind her. Early 20s, my age, also crying. She looked at me and said, "Are you his daughter too?" I remember just staring at her, not processing the words. "What do you mean, too?" Then 3 teenagers filed in behind them, 2 boys and a girl, looking uncomfortable in formal clothes. And then another woman, older, elegant, holding tissues. She looked at my mum sitting in the front row, and her face went pale. That's when everything unraveled. The younger woman, still crying, said she couldn't believe our dad was gone. Our dad. She kept saying our dad. I finally found my voice and asked who she was. She looked confused and said she was his daughter, obviously, and these were her brothers and sister, and that was their mum, his wife. The world tilted sideways. I actually laughed because it was so absurd it had to be a joke. But she wasn't joking. None of them were joking. The older woman, the one she called Mum, was staring at my actual mum now. You could see the recognition dawning on both their faces at the same time. My mum stood up, walked over, and in this eerily calm voice asked the woman who she was. The woman said she was Dad's wife, had been for 20 years. They lived 3 hours north in a town I'd never heard my father mention once in my entire life. My mum said that was impossible because she was his wife. They'd been married for 35 years. They had 2 children. They had a home. The other woman shook her head, pulled out her phone, and showed my mum photos. Wedding photos, family photos. My dad, decades younger, in a different tux, marrying a different woman. My dad at birthday parties with different kids. My dad in a different house, a different life, smiling the exact same smile he smiled in our family photos. The funeral home erupted. People were shouting, crying, demanding explanations from a dead man who couldn't answer. The funeral director tried to calm everyone down. My mum collapsed into a chair, hyperventilating. The other wife was screaming about how this couldn't be real, how they'd just celebrated their anniversary last month. My brother was on his phone, frantically calling my dad's office, his friends, anyone who might explain this. The other daughter, the one my age, just stood there staring at me like I was a ghost. We looked nothing alike, but we had the same shocked expression. Her younger siblings looked terrified. I felt like I was going to throw up. This was my father's funeral, and somehow it had turned into the worst episode of a reality show ever conceived. Imagine being this confidently wrong about your entire existence. We postponed the service. Nobody could process what was happening. Both families retreated to separate corners of the funeral home, trying to piece together how this was possible. The other wife, Linda, explained that my dad told her he traveled constantly for work. He was a senior engineer on major projects that required him to be on site for weeks at a time. She said he'd leave every other week, be gone for 10 to 14 days, then come home. It was hard on the family, but the money was good and he always came back. Except he wasn't traveling for work, he was living with us. My mum did the same math in reverse. Dad told us he had intensive project deadlines that required him to stay in hotels near job sites, sometimes for 2 weeks straight. We never questioned it because that's what he'd always done, or so we thought. Turns out those job sites were a 3-hour drive north where he had another house, another wife, another set of kids living a completely parallel life. 20 years, 2 decades of this. We started comparing timelines and it was disturbingly perfect. He'd leave our house on a Monday, show up at theirs by dinner, stay for 12 days, leave their house, be back at ours within hours. He had it choreographed down to the minute. Different phone numbers for each family, different cars registered at each address. He'd even managed to attend parent-teacher conferences and sports events for all 5 of his children by carefully scheduling around his rotation. But that wasn't even the worst part. When we started digging into his finances with lawyers, the scope of the deception became clear. 2 mortgages, 2 life insurance policies, 2 complete sets of everything. He'd maintained separate bank accounts, told each wife he made a certain salary, and somehow managed to fund 2 entire households on 1 income, plus what must have been creative accounting. The financial records showed money moving in ways that made no sense until you understood he was literally living 2 lives. Both families filed claims on his life insurance. Turns out that's legally complicated when a man has 2 wives and neither marriage is technically invalid because he never divorced the first one, which means the second marriage might not be legal, which means the estate is a disaster. My mum's lawyer said this was one of the most complex cases he'd ever seen. Linda's lawyer said the same thing. We ended up in court, 2 families who should have never known about each other, fighting over scraps of a life that was entirely fabricated. The emotional fallout was worse than the financial mess. My entire childhood felt like a lie. Every memory was tainted. Every time he said he loved us, every holiday, every birthday, it all had this shadow over it now because he was saying and doing the exact same things with another family. My brother stopped talking about him entirely, couldn't even say his name without rage taking over. My mum had a breakdown and spent 2 weeks in a psychiatric facility because her entire marriage, her whole adult life, was based on a lie. Linda's family was equally destroyed. Her kids felt betrayed. The youngest daughter, only 15, started acting out in school. The older son dropped out of college. Linda herself became obsessed with finding out every detail, going through old records, trying to figure out when the lies started and if there were any moments that were real. We were all asking the same questions, and none of us had answers because the only person who knew the truth was dead. The court case is still ongoing. It's been 8 months since the funeral. We discovered there's a 3rd life insurance policy neither wife knew about, which raises the horrifying question of whether there might be a third family we haven't found yet. The lawyers are searching property records now. The whole thing feels like a sick joke, except nobody's laughing. I've met with my half-siblings a few times. It's awkward and painful, but also weirdly necessary. We're all victims of the same man's choices. The other daughter, her name is Sophie, and I actually like her. In another universe where our dad wasn't a sociopath, we might have been friends. Now we're united by shared trauma and a legal battle over an estate that's probably going to be eaten up by lawyer fees anyway. My mum and Linda refuse to speak to each other. They blame each other somehow, even though neither of them knew. It's easier to be angry at a living person than a dead one. I get it, but it's also exhausting. Everyone wants closure and there isn't any. Just questions, legal proceedings, and the knowledge that the man we all loved and trusted was living a double life so elaborate it should have been impossible. People keep asking how he managed it, how he kept track of it all, how he didn't slip up in 20 years. And honestly, I think that's the most disturbing part. He was that good at lying, that organized, that committed to the deception. It wasn't a mistake or an accident. It was a choice he made every single day for 2 decades. Sometimes the lies we discover aren't about secret families. They're hidden in plain sight, right on our phones. My buddy Jake had been single for about 6 months and was back on the dating app scene. We were hanging out at my place one night, just a casual Saturday, when he started showing me the absolute train wrecks he'd been matching with. Bad bios, weird photos, the whole spectrum of online dating chaos. Sarah, my wife, was sitting on the other end of the couch, scrolling through her phone, half watching some reality show on TV. Jake thought it would be hilarious if I re-downloaded Tinder, just to see if any of my old matches from before I got married were still on there. You know, for nostalgia or whatever. I hadn't been on a dating app in 4 years. Since Sarah and I got serious, but I was bored and Jake kept insisting, so I re-downloaded it as a joke. Logged back into my old account, which miraculously still existed. Started swiping through profiles while Jake laughed at the bizarre people still populating our hometown's dating pool. We were making jokes, Sarah was chuckling from her side of the couch. Everything felt normal and harmless. Then I swiped right and my entire world stopped. There she was, Sarah, my wife. Sarah's profile picture was one I'd literally taken of her last month at a winery we'd visited for our anniversary trip. The same photo she'd posted on Instagram. Her bio had accurate information, her age, her job, even mentioned she liked hiking and true crime podcasts. Things that were absolutely true about my wife, who was sitting 2 feet away from me. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Jake noticed my face and asked if I was okay. I couldn't speak. I just stared at the screen, swiping through her profile photos. There were 5 pictures total, all recent. All photos I recognized from the past few months. One from a friend's wedding, one from her birthday dinner. Casual shots that looked like someone who was actively dating would post. I screenshotted everything with shaking hands. The whole time Sarah was still sitting there, completely relaxed, typing on her phone. I forced myself to sound casual and asked who she was texting. She said her sister didn't even look up. My brain was spiraling. Was this real? Was she really on a dating app while sitting next to me? How long had this been going on? I needed to confirm what she was actually doing on her phone before I accused her of anything. I asked if her sister was okay, said she'd been texting for a while. Sarah looked up, a little confused by my sudden interest, and said, yeah, her sister was just venting about work drama. Then she did something that caught me off guard. She turned her phone screen toward me and showed me the text conversation. It was actually her sister. Real messages about a difficult coworker. Timestamps showing they'd been texting for the past 20 minutes. I was so confused I felt dizzy. If she was actually texting her sister, then what was the profile? I made a decision in that moment. I turned my phone toward her and asked if she could explain why she was on Tinder. Her face when she saw the screen went from confused to absolutely pale. She grabbed my phone, stared at her own profile, and said that wasn't her, that she didn't have a dating profile, that someone must have stolen her photos. Catfishing. That made sense, right? People steal photos all the time and create fake profiles. I wanted to believe that's what this was. We reported the profile immediately. Sarah was visibly shaken, kept saying she couldn't believe someone would do this, asking how they got her photos. Most of them were from her public Instagram, so it wasn't hard to figure out. We assumed it was some random creep and tried to move on with our evening, though the mood was definitely killed. Then my phone buzzed. A message from the fake profile. My stomach dropped. It had matched with me before we reported it, and now there was a direct message sitting in my inbox. Sarah was still holding my phone, and she opened it before I could stop her. The message was short, just one line. Tell your husband about Marcus. The color drained from Sarah's face completely. She looked like she might throw up. I asked who Marcus was. She didn't answer, just stared at the screen. I asked again, louder this time. Jake, sensing the shift in energy, quietly excused himself and left. Sarah finally looked at me, and I could see everything in her eyes before she said a word. Guilt, fear, panic. Marcus was her personal trainer. She'd mentioned him before, casually, the way you mention anyone you interact with regularly. She'd started going to the gym 6 months ago, said she wanted to get in shape, feel better about herself. I'd been supportive, even paid for her membership. She went 3 times a week, sometimes 4. Always came home energized, talking about her workouts. I never suspected anything because why would I? It was the gym. She was improving her health, normal stuff. Except it wasn't just the gym. She finally admitted, sitting on our couch with tears streaming down her face, that she'd been having an affair with Marcus for 8 months. 8 months. Longer than she'd even been going to the gym, which meant she'd started going to the gym specifically because of him. They'd met at a coffee shop, hit it off, and when he mentioned he was a personal trainer, she'd signed up at his gym as an excuse to see him regularly. The affair had been going on the entire time. All those workout sessions were sometimes actual workouts, and sometimes meeting him at his apartment. The glow she'd come home with wasn't from exercise, it was from sleeping with someone else. And I'd paid for the gym membership that facilitated the whole thing. The irony was suffocating, but that wasn't even the worst part. I asked about the dating profile. If she was having an affair, why was someone catfishing her? Sarah broke down completely and admitted the profile wasn't a catfish. She'd made it. She'd been on dating apps for months, talking to other guys, going on dates when she said she was at the gym or out with friends. Marcus wasn't her only affair. He was just the main one. There were others, casual hookups, guys she'd meet for drinks. She said she didn't know why she did it, that something was broken in her, that she'd felt trapped, and instead of talking to me, she'd just spiraled. The Marcus reveal, the message telling me to ask about him, that wasn't some stranger. It was Marcus himself. He'd found out about the dating profile, realized Sarah was seeing other people while seeing him, and decided to blow up her entire life out of spite. He'd created the fake profile using her photos to make sure I'd see it, then sent the message to expose her. His revenge for her cheating on him while she was cheating on me. The layers of deception were almost impressive in their complexity. Things went from bad to unhinged. I told Sarah to leave. She begged me to let her explain more, to go to counseling, to work through it. I couldn't even look at her. Jake came back after she left, helped me drink half a bottle of whiskey, and listened while I tried to process that my marriage was over. The next day I contacted a lawyer. Sarah moved in with a friend and kept calling, texting, trying to apologize. I blocked her number. The divorce was brutal. She tried to fight for half of everything, even though she'd been the one having multiple affairs. My lawyer used the dating profile and her admission against her. We settled out of court eventually. She got less than she wanted, but more than she deserved. I kept the house, most of our savings, and my dignity. I found out later that Marcus had ended things with her the moment he sent that message. He wanted to hurt her the way she'd hurt him by lying about being exclusive. The other guys from the dating apps disappeared when they realized she was married. Sarah ended up alone, exactly what she deserved. Last I heard, she moved to a different city, probably trying to escape the reputation she'd built. The whole experience broke something in me for a while. Trusting someone completely, building a life with them, only to discover they've been lying about fundamental things for months. It messes with your head, but I'm doing better now. Therapy helped, time helped, and knowing that her attempt to have it all ended with her having nothing helped a little too, if I'm being honest. Digital betrayals can cut deep, but what if the evidence of deception is buried in something as simple as an email? My brother Jake called me from the hospital parking lot, voice tight with stress. He was about to go into surgery for a torn ACL. Nothing life-threatening, but he'd be under anesthesia for a few hours. He needed me to check his personal email for a confirmation code from his insurance company. They were supposed to send pre-authorization for the surgery, and he needed to forward it to the billing department before they'd let him go under. Simple favor, right? I told him no problem. He gave me his login info, and I promised to text him the code as soon as I found it. I logged into his email on my laptop and started scrolling through his inbox, looking for anything from his insurance provider. Mostly junk, some work emails, nothing important. Then I noticed he had a draft saved. Just one. Sitting there in his drafts folder like it was waiting to be found. I don't know why I clicked on it. Curiosity maybe, or boredom. I wasn't trying to snoop, but the moment I opened it, I wished I hadn't. The email was addressed to his best friend Chris. They'd known each other since college, been inseparable for years. Chris was his best man at his wedding. The email was dated from 3 months ago, but never sent. Just saved as a draft, probably written late at night in a moment of weakness or courage or desperation. The words were raw and honest in a way that made my stomach drop. He'd written that he couldn't keep pretending anymore, that every day felt like a lie, that he was in love with Chris, had been for years, maybe always, that marrying Emily was the biggest mistake of his life, and he didn't know how to undo it without destroying everyone around him. He called his marriage a sham, said he felt like he was suffocating. The email ended mid-sentence, like he'd started typing and couldn't figure out how to finish, so he just saved it and never looked at it again. I sat there staring at my screen, completely frozen. My brother was gay. My brother was in love with his best friend. My brother had married Emily, this sweet woman we all adored, while being in love with someone else entirely. The wedding had been 2 years ago, this massive event with 200 guests and a reception at a country club. Our parents had been so proud. Emily had been radiant. Jake had seemed happy, or at least I'd thought he was happy because why would I think otherwise? I screenshot the draft. I don't know why. Maybe as proof that I wasn't imagining it, or maybe because I knew Jake would delete it eventually, and I needed evidence for the conversation we were definitely going to have. Then I logged out, found the insurance email in a different folder, texted him the confirmation code, and tried to process what I'd just discovered. The surgery went fine. Jake texted me later that evening saying thanks for handling the email situation. I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say. How do you text someone back when you've just uncovered the secret that's apparently destroying them from the inside? I needed time to figure out what to do with this information, if anything. 2 weeks went by. I couldn't stop thinking about that email. Every time I saw Jake, I looked for signs I'd missed before. The way he talked about Emily felt affectionate but distant, like she was a good friend rather than his wife. The way he lit up when Chris was around. How he'd avoid physical affection with Emily in public, but would casually touch Chris's shoulder or lean in close when they talked. It was all there, obvious in retrospect, invisible if you weren't looking for it. Then came the family dinner. Our parents hosted these monthly gatherings where everyone had to show up and pretend we all got along better than we did. Jake and Emily arrived together, holding hands, looking like the perfect couple. My mom was making her famous lasagna. My dad was arguing about politics with our uncle. Normal family chaos. We were halfway through dinner when Emily stood up, glass of water in hand, and asked for everyone's attention. She was glowing. That's the only way to describe it. She announced that she and Jake were expecting. She was 8 weeks pregnant. The room erupted in excitement. My mom started crying happy tears. My dad hugged Jake. Emily was laughing and accepting congratulations from everyone. And Jake looked like he was about to pass out. His smile didn't reach his eyes. He was hugging people and saying thank you, but his whole body language screamed trapped. I couldn't let this continue. Not now. Not with a baby involved. I waited until the celebration died down a bit, then pulled Jake aside and told him we needed to talk outside. He followed me to the backyard, probably grateful for an excuse to escape the attention. The moment we were alone, I asked him point blank if he'd deleted that draft email from 3 months ago. His face went white. He asked what I was talking about, but he knew exactly what I meant. I told him I'd seen it when I logged into his account for the insurance code. Told him I knew about Chris, knew about everything. He tried to deny it at first, said I'd misunderstood, that it was just a moment of confusion. But I showed him the screenshot and he crumbled. He broke down completely, started crying in a way I'd never seen him cry before. He admitted everything. He was gay. He'd known since high school, but our family was conservative. Church every Sunday, traditional values, the whole package. Coming out wasn't an option, so he'd buried it, tried to pray it away, dated women, convinced himself he could make it work. Emily had been his girlfriend in college. They'd broken up and gotten back together a few times, and when our parents started pressuring him about marriage in his late 20s, he'd proposed because it felt like the path of least resistance. He loved Emily, he said, but as a friend, a wonderful friend who deserves so much better than a husband who was in love with someone else. He'd been in love with Chris for years, since college, maybe longer. Chris didn't know. The email had been Jake's attempt to finally be honest, but he'd chickened out and never sent it. And now Emily was pregnant, and he felt like his entire life was a prison he'd built for himself. The level of denial required to maintain this for years is honestly staggering. I gave him an ultimatum. He had 1 week to tell Emily the truth, or I would. He begged me not to make him do it, especially now with the baby, but I told him that was exactly why he had to do it. She deserved to know before she got further into a pregnancy with a man who was living a lie. He had 7 days. He told her in 5. I don't know exactly how the conversation went because I wasn't there, but Emily called me 2 days later, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. She said Jake had confessed everything. The marriage was over. She was devastated, humiliated, furious. She felt like their entire relationship had been a fraud. She kept asking if I'd known, if everyone had known, if she was the only idiot who hadn't seen it. I assured her nobody knew except me, and I'd only found out by accident. It didn't seem to help. And here's where it gets absurd. Jake came out to our parents the same week, told them he was gay, that the marriage was ending, that he'd been living a lie to please them. Our dad didn't speak to him for 2 weeks. Our mom cried and said she didn't understand how this happened, like sexual orientation was something you caught from bad influences. The family dinner group chat became a war zone. Half the extended family was supportive. The other half quoted scripture. It was a complete implosion. Emily decided to keep the baby. She's raising it as a single mother, which she's handling with more grace than Jake deserves. She told him he could be involved as much or as little as he wanted, but their marriage was done. The divorce was finalized 3 months ago. She got the house, most of their savings, and full custody with visitation rights for Jake. Jake moved in with Chris. Turns out Chris had been in love with him too, for years, but never said anything because Jake was married. They're together now, actually happy for the first time in either of their lives, according to Jake. Our parents still barely acknowledge Chris's existence. Family gatherings are tense and awkward, split between people who've accepted Jake's truth and people who think he destroyed his family for selfish reasons. I've gone back and forth on whether I did the right thing. Part of me thinks I should have stayed out of it, let Jake handle his own mess in his own time. But then I think about Emily, about how much worse it would have been if she'd found out after the baby was born, or years down the line. She deserved honesty, even if the truth destroyed everything. Jake thanked me eventually, months later, said forcing his hand was the only way he ever would have done it, that he'd have kept living the lie until it killed him. I'm glad he's happy now, genuinely, but the fallout from that one email, that one draft he never sent, took down an entire marriage, split our family in half, and left a lot of people hurt in ways that won't heal quickly. Not all surveillance comes from the people we suspect. Sometimes we're the ones watching ourselves. For months, I felt like I was losing my mind. Little things at first. I'd come home from work and my coffee mug would be on the opposite side of the kitchen counter from where I'd left it that morning. Books I remembered leaving on my nightstand would be stacked neatly on my desk. My couch pillows rearranged. I chalked it up to exhaustion, working too many hours, not paying attention to where I put things. Then the food started disappearing. I'd buy groceries on Sunday, plan out my meals for the week, and by Wednesday half of it would be gone. Not spoiled or thrown away, just gone, eaten. I lived alone in a 1-bedroom apartment, so unless I was developing some kind of aggressive midnight snacking habit, I couldn't remember. Something was very wrong. The footsteps started around the same time. I'd wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning hearing someone walking around my apartment. Slow, deliberate steps. I'd lie there frozen, too terrified to get up and check. But when I finally worked up the courage to turn on the lights and look around, no one was ever there. Nothing out of place. No signs of forced entry. Just me, alone, feeling like I was being watched in my own home. That's when I started noticing Frank. My neighbor from across the hall, mid-50s, lived alone, mostly kept to himself. We'd exchange polite nods in the hallway, but never had real conversations. Suddenly, he was everywhere. I'd go to the grocery store and he'd be there, same aisle, pretending to look at cereal. I'd hit the gym after work and he'd show up 20 minutes later. My regular coffee shop on Saturday mornings. Frank would walk in, order a drink, sit in the corner watching me over his newspaper. The paranoia set in hard. Frank was stalking me. He had to be. The timing was too perfect, too consistent. Maybe he had a key to my apartment. Maybe the landlord had given him a spare. That would explain the moved items, the missing food, everything. He was coming into my place when I wasn't home, going through my things, and now he was following me around town to keep tabs on me. I went full paranoid and installed security cameras, 4 of them covering every angle of my apartment. Front door, living room, bedroom, kitchen. They fed to an app on my phone with cloud storage for all the footage. If Frank was breaking in, I'd have proof. I'd catch him red-handed and go straight to the police. I let the cameras run for 2 weeks, checking the footage obsessively every morning. Nothing. No one came in or out except me. But items were still moving. Food was still disappearing. I was still hearing footsteps at night. The cameras should have caught something, but every time I reviewed the footage, my apartment was empty. Just my stuff, shifting around on its own like some kind of haunted house situation. Then I decided to watch all of it, every single hour of footage from the past 2 weeks. I took a Saturday, made coffee, and settled in to find proof of what was happening to me. 3 hours in, I found it. Except it wasn't Frank breaking into my apartment. It was me. The timestamp showed 2:15 in the morning from 4 days earlier. I watched myself get out of bed, eyes half closed, and walk into the kitchen. I opened the fridge, took out leftover pasta, and ate it standing at the counter, methodically, like a robot. Then I washed the dish, put it away, and went back to bed. The whole thing took 8 minutes. I had absolutely no memory of it. I kept watching, my stomach sinking further with each new clip. There I was at 3 in the morning, rearranging my living room furniture, moving the couch 6 inches to the left, adjusting the coffee table, repositioning the lamp. Another night showed me walking into my bedroom, taking books off the nightstand, and stacking them on my desk in a neat pile. Another showed me pacing my apartment for 20 minutes, just walking back and forth, those footsteps I'd been hearing in the night. But that wasn't even the worst part. I found footage of me leaving my apartment, multiple times. I'd walk out the front door at midnight, 1 in the morning, sometimes later. The cameras didn't cover the hallway, so I couldn't see where I went. But 2 hours later, sometimes 3, I'd return. And in one clip, I came back carrying grocery bags. I watched myself unpack groceries at 2:30 in the morning, putting away food I didn't remember buying, and then going back to bed like nothing happened. I'd been sleepwalking for months. Severe, complex sleepwalking, where I was doing entire activities, having whole routines, living a second life I had zero conscious memory of. The realization was terrifying. I could have hurt myself. I could have walked into traffic. I could have done anything and had no idea. The Frank situation suddenly made horrible, embarrassing sense. I went back through my footage and found a clip from a week ago. 3 in the morning, I'd left my apartment. The hallway camera I'd installed showed Frank's door opening 10 minutes later. He'd followed me out. He hadn't been stalking me. He'd been worried about me. He'd probably seen me wandering around at night, maybe saw me leave the building multiple times, and started following me to make sure I was safe. All those times I thought he was creeping on me at the grocery store or the gym. He was just trying to watch out for me during my sleepwalking episodes. I'd been so convinced he was the threat that I never considered I might be the problem. I made an appointment with my doctor the next day, brought the footage with me because I knew how insane it sounded. My doctor referred me to a neurologist who specialized in sleep disorders. After a bunch of tests and questions about my routine, medications, stress levels, everything, he diagnosed me with a severe parasomnia disorder. Turns out it was triggered by a medication I'd started taking 3 months earlier for anxiety, the same timeline as when all of this started. The irony of taking anxiety medication that caused a disorder, which made me exponentially more anxious, is not lost on me. The neurologist switched my medication, gave me some safety protocols for sleepwalking, and recommended I install locks on my doors that required combinations I'd be unlikely to manage while asleep. Within 2 weeks of changing medications, the episode stopped. I slept through the night. My stuff stayed where I put it. My food stayed in the fridge. I owed Frank an apology, a massive one. I knocked on his door one evening and explained everything, showed him some of the footage, told him about the diagnosis, apologized for being suspicious of him when he was just trying to help. He was incredibly understanding, said he'd figured something was off, but didn't want to invade my privacy by bringing it up. He just wanted to make sure I didn't wander into danger. We're actually friends now. He checks in on me sometimes, asks how I'm sleeping. I update him when I change medications just in case any new side effects pop up. The whole experience was humiliating but also weirdly bonding. Looking back, the scariest part wasn't the sleepwalking itself. It was how thoroughly I'd convinced myself of a completely false narrative. I'd built this entire story in my head about being stalked, found evidence that supported it, and never questioned whether I might be wrong. I'd been gaslighting myself for months, creating my own nightmare and then living in it. At least my confusion was medical. The next person's discovery was purely intentional sabotage. I'd been working at this marketing firm for 6 years, slowly climbing my way up from junior copywriter to senior account manager. When the director of client relations position opened up, I applied immediately. It was the job I'd been working towards since I started, the promotion that would finally validate all those late nights and weekend projects. The competition was steep, but I felt confident. My portfolio was strong, my client retention rate was the highest in the department, and I'd been told multiple times by upper management that I was a natural fit for leadership. There were 3 of us in the running: me, a guy from the sales team named Derek, and Jessica from account coordination. Jessica and I had worked together on several projects over the years. We weren't friends exactly, but we were friendly. Grabbed coffee sometimes, made small talk in the break room, the usual coworker relationship. She seemed nice enough, if a little overly competitive, but everyone's competitive in marketing, so I didn't think much of it. The interviews went well. I felt good about my chances. Then I went on a week-long vacation to visit family, something I'd planned months in advance. I figured the timing was fine since they wouldn't make a decision until the following month anyway. I spent the week hiking with my parents, completely disconnected from work email, enjoying actual time off for the first time in forever. I got back on a Monday morning, walked into the office with my coffee, and was immediately intercepted by someone from HR. She asked me to come with her, wouldn't say why, just that it was urgent. My stomach dropped. That's never a good sign. We went to a conference room where the head of HR and my department manager were already waiting. The energy in the room was ice cold. They told me I was being suspended effective, immediately pending an investigation into inappropriate conduct. I asked what they were talking about. They pulled up emails supposedly sent from my account to 3 different clients over the past week. The emails were sexual, graphic, completely unprofessional. Propositioning clients, making crude comments, the kind of stuff that gets you fired and possibly sued. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I told them I'd never sent those emails, that I'd been on vacation with no laptop, barely any cell service. But they had screenshots. The emails came from my company account, had my signature, were sent during business hours. It looked damning. They suspended me on the spot, said I'd be contacted once the investigation concluded. I was escorted out of the building like a criminal. 6 years of work gone in 15 minutes. I drove home in shock. I knew I hadn't sent those emails, but couldn't prove it. My laptop had been locked in my desk drawer while I was gone. My email password was strong, not something easy to guess, but someone had clearly accessed my account and sent those messages while I was away. The question was who and how. I called my friend Marcus, who works in IT, not at my company but freelance cybersecurity. I explained the situation and asked if there was any way to prove the emails hadn't come from me. He said maybe if I could get him the original email files with full headers and metadata. I still had remote access to my work email from my phone, so I forwarded him everything before they locked me out completely. Marcus spent 2 days analyzing the files. When he called me back, he sounded excited. He'd found something. The emails had metadata embedded that showed which computer they'd been created on. Not sent from, but actually composed on. Every computer has a unique identifier, and these emails were drafted on a machine that wasn't mine. He traced the computer registration through the company's network logs, which I'd given him access to back when I'd helped him with a project months ago. The computer was registered to Jessica. My coworker, the woman competing with me for the same promotion. The timestamps showed the emails had been created during her work shifts, on days I was confirmed to be on vacation. She'd somehow gotten access to my email account, probably guessed my password or used a keylogger, and sent those emails to sabotage me. But she'd forgotten that digital files leave fingerprints. She'd covered her tracks by making it look like they came from my account, but she hadn't scrubbed the metadata showing they'd been drafted on her computer first. The level of planning this required is actually impressive in the worst possible way. Marcus compiled everything into a report: timestamps, computer IDs, network logs, the whole digital paper trail. I contacted a lawyer before going back to HR because I wanted to make sure I handled this correctly. My lawyer reviewed Marcus's findings and confirmed it was solid evidence. We scheduled a meeting with HR and my lawyer presented everything. Watching HR's faces change as they realized what had happened was surreal. They'd suspended the wrong person. They went from treating me like a predator to apologizing profusely in about 20 minutes. They immediately launched an investigation into Jessica, pulled her computer, checked her access logs, found evidence she'd been logging into my email account multiple times over the past month. She'd been planning this for a while, waiting for the perfect moment when I'd be away and unable to defend myself. But that wasn't even the worst part. When they confronted Jessica, she initially denied everything, said the evidence was fabricated, that I was trying to frame her. Then they showed her the metadata, the computer IDs, the timestamps. She broke down and admitted it, but her reasoning was what really got me. She said she deserved the promotion more than me, that I'd only gotten as far as I had because I was friendly with management, that she'd worked just as hard and it wasn't fair. She'd tried to destroy my career, my reputation, potentially my ability to work in this industry again, because she thought a promotion should be hers. The entitlement was staggering. HR fired her on the spot. Then they informed her they were pressing charges for corporate sabotage, unauthorized access to company systems, and fraud. She'd committed actual crimes, not just violated company policy. The clients who'd received the inappropriate emails were contacted and informed of the situation. Most were understanding once they learned I'd been framed. One threatened to pull their contract anyway, because the whole situation reflected poorly on the company's security, but eventually decided to stay after we offered them a discount and assured them we were overhauling our systems. I got the promotion. They offered it to me with an apology and a settlement agreement. The settlement was basically hush money to keep me from talking publicly about how easy it had been for Jessica to access my account, which would make the company look incompetent from a cybersecurity standpoint. I took the settlement. It was generous, and I wasn't interested in blowing up my new position by becoming the guy who aired the company's dirty laundry. Jessica's criminal case is still ongoing, last I heard. Her lawyer is trying to get the charges reduced, but the evidence is pretty ironclad. She's facing potential jail time and definitely won't work in marketing again. Her name is poison in the industry now. Word got around about what she did, even though I didn't spread it. People talk. Derek, the third candidate, ended up leaving the company a few months later for a position somewhere else. I don't blame him. The whole situation was toxic and awkward. I'm doing well in my new role, but I changed all my passwords and enabled two-factor authentication on everything now. I also requested additional security training for the whole department, because if Jessica could access my account that easily, it could happen to anyone. The irony is that Jessica probably would have been a strong candidate on her own merit. She was good at her job, had solid client relationships, knew the industry. But instead of competing fairly, she decided to cheat and ended up destroying her entire career. All because she couldn't handle the possibility that someone else might be better qualified. Sometimes the best revenge really is just giving someone enough rope to hang themselves. I didn't have to do anything except present the evidence. Jessica's own actions, her own sloppiness with metadata, her own decision to commit fraud, that's what took her down. Sometimes the proof of betrayal isn't in metadata. It's broadcast accidentally to hundreds of people. My boss Richard was one of those managers who thought leadership meant publicly tearing people down. He had this thing where he'd single me out in meetings, interrupt my presentations, talk over me when I was explaining projects to clients. It wasn't constructive criticism, it was just humiliation for sport. He seemed to get off on making me look incompetent in front of our colleagues. I'd been with the company for 3 years, working in business development. I was good at my job, consistently hit my targets, brought in solid clients. But Richard treated me like I was barely capable of answering phones. In team meetings, he'd roll his eyes when I spoke, make snide comments about my ideas, and then take credit when those same ideas worked. Classic toxic boss behavior. The worst part was that HR didn't care. I'd filed complaints, documented incidents, followed all the proper channels, but Richard had been with the company for 15 years and was buddies with half the executive team. I was told to be more assertive, to not take things personally, all the usual dismissive responses you get when reporting workplace harassment. Our quarterly presentation was coming up. This was the big one where each department head presented results and projections to the entire executive team, including the CEO. I'd been preparing for weeks, my numbers were excellent, I had detailed slides, client testimonials, the whole package. This was my chance to prove myself directly to the people above Richard. The day of the presentation, I was nervous but ready. The conference room was packed, CEO at the head of the table, CFO, COO, all the VPs, and Richard sitting there with his usual smug expression. I started my presentation, walking through our quarterly growth, highlighting successful campaigns, showing client retention rates that were up 18% from last year. I was maybe 10 minutes in when Richard interrupted. Didn't raise his hand, didn't wait for a pause, just started talking over me. He said something like, "Let me show everyone how this should really be presented," like I was a child who didn't understand PowerPoint. The executive team looked uncomfortable, but nobody stopped him. He walked up to the front, told me to sit down, and took over the laptop connected to the projector. Here's where things get beautiful. Richard minimized my presentation and opened his web browser, saying he wanted to pull up some better examples of data visualization. The second his browser opened, his most recent tabs populated across the top of the screen, projected in HD on the wall behind him for everyone to see. The first tab was his email, open to a draft he'd been writing to our CEO. I could see the first line, something about how current leadership was running the company into the ground. The next tab was a job application portal, specifically our biggest competitor's career page. He'd been applying for positions at rival companies, which itself was a fireable offense given the non-compete clause in our contracts. And here's where it gets absurd. The remaining tabs were various websites that absolutely should not be accessed on a company computer. Explicit content, multiple tabs of it, all there on the projector for the entire executive team to witness. The room went silent, that specific kind of silence where everyone is simultaneously processing the same horrifying information. Richard's face drained of all color. He just stood there frozen, staring at the screen like he couldn't comprehend what was happening. Someone in the back coughed. The CEO shifted in his seat. Richard finally moved, reaching for the laptop to close the browser. Except in his panic, instead of closing it, he accidentally clicked on one of the explicit tabs. It opened full screen, on the projector, in crystal clear detail. Someone gasped. I think the CFO looked away. Richard was frantically clicking, making it worse, opening more tabs in his confusion. The CEO stood up and told Richard to step away from the computer. His voice was calm, but you could hear the fury underneath. Richard started stammering, trying to explain, saying it wasn't what it looked like, except it was exactly what it looked like. The job applications, the email bad-mouthing leadership, the inappropriate content on company equipment during work hours. All of it projected for everyone to see. Security was called. Actual security guards came to the conference room and escorted Richard out. He was still trying to explain as they walked him down the hallway. His voice faded as they got further away. The room stayed silent for a few seconds after he left. Then the CEO turned to me and asked if I could continue my presentation. I was in shock but managed to pull myself together. Closed Richard's browser, reopened my presentation, and picked up where I'd left off. My hands were shaking, but I got through it. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. Actual standing ovation. The CEO thanked me for my professionalism under bizarre circumstances. Several executives came up after to personally commend my work. Richard was fired within the hour. They didn't even let him come back to collect his things. HR packed up his office and mailed everything to his house. The official reason given to the company was violation of acceptable use policies and conduct unbecoming of a manager. But everyone knew what really happened. The story spread through the office by end of day. Then came the aftermath I didn't expect. 3 weeks later, the CEO called me into his office. I thought maybe there was fallout from the incident, something I'd done wrong. Instead, he offered me Richard's position, Director of Business Development, the job Richard had held for 6 years. They'd considered external candidates but decided I'd already proven I could handle the pressure and maintain composure in difficult situations. I accepted immediately, got a significant raise, my own office, a team to manage. Everything Richard had, I now had. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The person he'd spent years trying to humiliate ended up with his job because he'd humiliated himself in the most spectacular way possible. The best part was cleaning out Richard's old office and finding his notebook where he'd apparently kept track of ways to undermine me. Actual written notes about how to make me look bad in meetings, ideas for taking credit for my work, strategies for getting me fired. He'd been actively plotting against me for over a year. I turned the notebook over to HR for documentation purposes, but kept photos of the pages for myself, just in case. I ran into Richard once, about 6 months later, at a coffee shop. He saw me, went pale again like he was reliving that conference room moment, and quickly left. I heard through industry contacts that he'd had trouble finding new work. Turns out getting fired for that specific combination of offenses makes you pretty unemployable in our field. Word gets around, my team is doing great. We've exceeded every quarterly goal since I took over. I managed differently than Richard did, obviously. No public humiliation, no taking credit for other people's work, actual mentorship and support. Radical concept, morale is higher, productivity is up, and we've landed some major clients. Looking back, if Richard had just let me finish my presentation that day, he'd probably still have his job. But he couldn't help himself. He had to try one more time to make me look small. Instead, he accidentally broadcasted every terrible thing he'd been doing to the people who could actually fire him. His need to humiliate me ended up being exactly what destroyed him. Public embarrassment can end careers, but what if you discovered your entire relationship was a performance? My girlfriend Emma had always been into creative stuff, photography, journaling, that kind of thing. So when she told me she wanted to start a podcast about dating and modern relationships, I thought it was a great idea. She was articulate, funny, had interesting perspectives on things. I helped her pick out a decent microphone, set up her recording space in her apartment, even listened to her first few episodes and gave feedback. Supportive boyfriend stuff. The podcast started small, maybe 100 downloads per episode, mostly her friends and some random people who stumbled across it. She'd talk about dating culture, red flags, green flags, share anonymous stories from listeners, nothing that made me uncomfortable. I'd listen to every episode while doing dishes or driving to work, proud that she was putting herself out there and building something. A few months in, her numbers started growing. She got better at promoting on social media, started getting sponsors, built a small but dedicated following. I was genuinely happy for her. She'd found this thing she was passionate about and it was working. She never talked about our relationship specifically on the show, kept things general or used examples from her past. I appreciated the boundary. Then one Tuesday afternoon, my buddy Chris texted me, just 4 words that made my stomach drop. "Dude, you need to listen to this." He sent me a link to Emma's latest episode. The title was How I'm Dating Someone While in Love with Someone Else. The episode had dropped that morning while I was at work. I pulled over in a parking lot and hit play. Emma's voice came through my speakers, warm and confessional like always. She started by saying this episode was going to be more personal than usual, more vulnerable. She was going to share her current situation because she knew other people must be going through similar things. Then she described our relationship in excruciating detail. She talked about dating someone who was stable and dependable, but emotionally unavailable. Someone who struggled with communication, who shut down during arguments, who couldn't understand her need for emotional depth. She described fights we'd had, using exact phrases I'd said, recounting conversations I remembered having in private. She mentioned my habit of organizing the pantry when I was stressed, my weird thing about needing the TV volume on even numbers, the weekend trip we'd taken to the mountains where I'd gotten upset about something stupid. She never said my name, but she didn't have to. Anyone who knew us would recognize me instantly. And she had hundreds of listeners now, including mutual friends, her co-workers, people from our social circle. I felt completely exposed, like she'd stripped me naked in front of strangers. The way she spun the narrative was what really got me. She positioned herself as this thoughtful, emotionally intelligent person, trapped in a relationship with someone who couldn't meet her needs. She painted me as controlling because I'd asked her to stop texting her ex, emotionally unavailable because I didn't want to have deep conversations at midnight when I had work at 6 in the morning. She made every normal relationship boundary sound like a character flaw. Then she got to the real point of the episode. She was in love with someone else, had been for months, her best friend Oliver, who she'd known since college. They'd been spending more time together lately, having these amazing deep conversations, and she'd realized he understood her in ways I never could. But she was stuck because she didn't want to hurt me by breaking up, didn't know how to leave a stable relationship for an uncertain one, was scared of making the wrong choice. The comment section was brutal. Hundreds of people weighing in on my relationship, my personality, my worth as a partner. Most of them sided with Emma. Told her she deserved better, called me toxic, a red flag, emotionally abusive. A few people questioned why she was airing this publicly instead of just breaking up with me, but they were drowned out by the supporters telling her to follow her heart and leave the controlling boyfriend. I sat in my car for an hour, just processing. This wasn't a vague story about dating struggles. This was my life, my private moments, my relationship turned into content for strangers to consume and judge. And I'd had no idea it was coming. I confronted her that evening, showed up at her apartment and asked if we could talk. She knew immediately what it was about. I could see it on her face. I asked her how she could do this, how she could share our private life with the world without even telling me. She got defensive, said the podcast was fictionalized storytelling, that she'd never used my name, that I was being paranoid if I thought it was specifically about me. The audacity to gaslight me about my own relationship, while thousands of strangers were commenting on it, is genuinely impressive. I pulled up the episode on my phone and started reading comments aloud. People analyzing my behavior, diagnosing me with various personality disorders, telling Emma she should leave me. I asked her how this was fictionalized when mutual friends were texting me, asking if I was okay. She tried to backtrack, said she didn't think it would be a big deal, that she'd just been processing her feelings out loud. I asked about Oliver. She admitted they'd been getting closer, said nothing physical had happened, but yeah, she had feelings for him. Had been having feelings for a while. Instead of talking to me about problems in our relationship, she decided to broadcast them to strangers and develop an emotional affair with her best friend. I broke up with her right there. Told her I wasn't going to be content for her podcast anymore, that she'd violated my trust in a way I couldn't forgive. She started crying, saying she'd made a mistake, that she did love me, that she'd take the episode down. But the damage was done. Hundreds of people had already listened. Screenshots of comments were being shared. My reputation was trashed among people I'd never even met. Here's where it gets absurd. I decided if she could air our relationship publicly, so could I. I recorded my own response. Not a podcast, just a video I posted to social media. I calmly explained what had happened, showed screenshots of the timeline, proving Emma and I were still together when she'd recorded the episode, included text messages between us from that same week where she'd told me she loved me. I pointed out the specific lies and misrepresentations in her narrative. Didn't attack her, just presented facts. The response was immediate. People who'd been calling me toxic in her comments started backtracking. Emma's podcast sponsors reached out asking for clarification on whether she'd been exploiting her relationship for content. A few dropped her immediately when they couldn't get a satisfactory answer. Her comment sections turned from supportive to critical. People started questioning the ethics of what she'd done, whether other stories on her podcast were also real people being exposed without consent. Emma tried damage control. Posted an apology saying she'd blurred lines between her personal life and her content, that she regretted hurting me, but the apology felt hollow and corporate. Her follower count started dropping. More sponsors pulled out. Within 2 weeks, she'd announced the podcast was going on indefinite hiatus. Oliver, the supposed soulmate, apparently wanted nothing to do with the drama. He distanced himself from Emma pretty quickly once everything went public. Turns out being the other guy in a messy public breakup wasn't as romantic as late-night conversations had made it seem. I heard through mutual friends that Emma tried to restart the podcast a few months later under a different name, but it never gained traction. Her reputation in the podcasting community was done. People remembered her as the person who'd weaponized her relationship for content and got caught. The whole thing taught me that privacy matters, that some things should stay between partners, that turning your life into content always has consequences, especially when you're not the only character in the story. Emma traded our relationship for podcast engagement and lost both. At least I could defend myself publicly. But sometimes betrayal is delivered so personally, you never see it coming. I was hosting my sister Rachel's baby shower at my house. She was 7 months pregnant with her first kid, glowing and happy, surrounded by friends and family. I'd spent weeks planning the whole thing. Decorations, games, a ridiculous 3-tier cake shaped like a stork. My mom had flown in from across the country. Rachel's mother-in-law brought half her church group. The living room was packed with women cooing over tiny baby clothes and guessing the circumference of Rachel's belly with yarn. Derek, Rachel's husband, had been there for the first hour doing the supportive husband thing, greeting guests, helping me set up the gift table, taking photos. But as the afternoon went on, I noticed him drinking. A lot. We'd put out mimosas and wine for the adults, casual shower drinks, but Derek was hitting the bar cart in the corner like he was trying to forget something. I was in the kitchen refilling the punch bowl when he followed me in. The kitchen was away from the main party, quieter, just the sound of laughter filtering in from the living room. Derek closed the door behind him. That should have been my first warning sign, but I just figured he needed a break from the baby shower estrogen overload. He leaned against the counter, visibly drunk, eyes unfocused, asked if we could talk. I said sure, thinking maybe he was nervous about becoming a dad or having some kind of pre-baby crisis he needed to vent about. I kept filling the punch bowl, not really paying attention, when he said he needed to tell me something before the baby came. The way he said it made me look up. His expression was intense, desperate almost. Then he just started talking, said he'd been carrying this secret for years and couldn't hold it anymore, that he'd made a mistake marrying Rachel, that I was the one he'd actually wanted, that he'd been in love with me since before he and Rachel even got together, but I'd been dating someone else at the time, so he'd settled for my sister instead. He called Rachel his second choice, said those exact words, second choice, like she was a consolation prize he'd accepted because he couldn't have what he really wanted. Then he said I was his true soulmate, that he thought about me constantly, that once the baby was born he was going to leave Rachel, and he wanted to know if I'd give him a chance. I just stood there frozen, punch bowl in hand, trying to process what was happening. This was my sister's husband, at her baby shower, confessing feelings for me while she was 7 months pregnant with his child in the next room. The absurdity was so complete I couldn't even form words. Then I heard my mum's voice behind Derek. She'd walked into the kitchen from the side door, coming back from her car where she'd gone to grab more gifts. She'd heard everything. Her face went from confused to horrified to absolutely furious in about 3 seconds. She screamed for Rachel. Not called, screamed. Her voice carried through the whole house. Derek immediately tried to backtrack, started saying he was joking, that it was just the alcohol talking, that he didn't mean any of it. But my mum wasn't having it. She told him to get out of her sight before she threw him out herself. Rachel appeared in the doorway asking what was wrong, looking between the three of us. My mom started to explain, but then we all heard it. Derek's voice, coming from the baby monitor on the kitchen counter. We'd set up monitors throughout the house so Rachel could hear if anyone needed her while she was opening gifts. The one in the kitchen had been on the whole time, broadcasting Derek's confession directly to the speaker in the living room, where 30 people had just heard him call his pregnant wife his second choice. Rachel's face went white. She grabbed the counter for support. Someone had turned down the music in the living room, and you could hear the uncomfortable silence, people whispering. Rachel looked at Derek and asked if what she'd heard was real. He tried to deny it again, but you could see in his eyes that he knew it was over. Then Rachel doubled over in pain, grabbed her stomach, said something was wrong. My mum rushed to her side. We got her to the couch while someone called 911. She was having contractions, real ones, intense and close together. The doctor later said it was stress-induced early labor. The shock and emotional trauma had triggered her body to start the process 7 weeks before her due date. The ambulance arrived within 10 minutes. They loaded Rachel up while Derek tried to get in with her. She screamed at him to stay away from her. Actually screamed, in front of the paramedics and all the baby shower guests, standing in my yard watching this disaster unfold. My mum went with her in the ambulance. I followed in my car. Derek tried to follow too, but I told him if he showed up at the hospital, I'd call security. Rachel was in labor for 6 hours. The baby arrived healthy despite being premature, a little girl, 6 pounds 3 ounces. Beautiful and perfect and born into the wreckage of her parents' marriage. Rachel held her daughter and cried. My mom cried. I cried. It should have been this joyful moment, but it was tainted by everything that had happened. Derek showed up at the hospital anyway. Tried to go to Rachel's room, but she'd already told the nurses she didn't want him there. He called me, begging me to talk to her, to explain that he'd made a mistake. I hung up on him. He called again, and again. I blocked his number, but that wasn't even the worst part. Before Rachel was discharged from the hospital, she had her lawyer come to the maternity ward. Filed for divorce right there, 2 days after giving birth. She told Derek through her attorney that he could see his daughter with supervised visitation, but she wanted nothing to do with him. The divorce papers cited emotional cruelty and infidelity, even though Derek claimed nothing physical had happened between us. Emotional infidelity still counts, especially when you confess it at your wife's baby shower. Derek started sending me messages from different numbers, emails, even tried to contact me through social media. Long rambling messages about how we were meant to be together, how now that he'd told the truth, we could finally be honest about our feelings, asking me to give him a chance. Except, there were no mutual feelings. I'd never thought of him that way, never given him any indication I was interested. He'd built this entire fantasy relationship in his head while married to my sister. The messages got obsessive. He'd send 20 in a day, alternating between declaring his love and getting angry that I wasn't responding. He showed up at my house twice. The second time I called the police and filed a report. My lawyer sent him a cease and desist letter. I had to get a restraining order because he wouldn't stop. Rachel moved back in with our parents with the baby. She's doing okay, all things considered. The baby is thriving. Rachel named her Hope, which felt symbolic, given everything. Derek has supervised visitation every other weekend, but Rachel refuses to speak to him directly. Everything goes through lawyers. The family has completely cut Derek off. He's not invited to anything, not welcome at any gatherings. He tried to show up at Christmas and my dad physically blocked the door. His own family is apparently horrified by what he did. His mum called Rachel to apologize, said she didn't raise him to behave this way. I still get the occasional message from Derek on platforms I haven't blocked yet. They're sadder now, less aggressive. He seems to have finally realized that his confession didn't unlock some secret romance. It just destroyed his family. Last I heard through mutual acquaintances, he'd moved to a different state for work, trying to start over somewhere his reputation hadn't followed him. The whole thing feels surreal looking back. He torpedoed his marriage, traumatized his pregnant wife, caused her to go into early labor, and lost his family because he'd been harboring this delusion for years. And he did it at a baby shower, in front of dozens of witnesses, on a baby monitor that broadcast his confession to everyone. Family secrets can destroy lives, but what about the secrets we keep hidden from ourselves? My mum had been writing an advice column for our local paper for about 10 years. It was called Dear Diane, one of those syndicated-style columns where people write in with their problems and the columnist offers wisdom and guidance. She'd always been proud of it, mentioned it at family gatherings, had copies of her favorite columns framed in her office. I'd read it occasionally when I picked up the paper, never thought much of it. Generic advice about mother-in-law problems, workplace drama, relationship issues, standard stuff. Then one Sunday I was reading the paper over coffee and a column caught my eye. A woman had written in about her son's messy divorce. The details were specific. The son had caught his wife cheating with a coworker. There was a brutal custody fight over their 2 kids. The wife was trying to claim the son was an unfit father to get full custody. The timeline matched my brother Kevin's divorce exactly. Same affair, same coworker, same custody accusations. Even the ages of the kids were right. I felt cold reading it. My mom had responded with sympathy for the letter writer, offered advice about supporting adult children through divorce, suggested therapy for the grandkids. But this wasn't some random person writing in. This was our family. My brother's actual divorce that had torn our family apart 2 years ago. My mum had written about it in her column, barely disguised, for thousands of local readers to consume with their morning coffee. I went to the paper's website and started reading through the archives. Years of Dear Diane columns, going back to when she first started. And there we were, column after column featuring situations I recognized. A letter about a husband's struggle with alcoholism that described my dad's drinking problem from 5 years ago, including the specific incident where he'd gotten a DUI coming home from a work event. A question about how to help a teenage daughter with an eating disorder that detailed my sister Amy's bulimia, her hospitalization, even the family therapy sessions we'd done. My failed engagement was there too. A letter from a mother whose daughter had called off her wedding 3 weeks before the ceremony because she'd discovered her fiancé was still in love with his ex-girlfriend. That was my story, my humiliation, my heartbreak, turned into content for my mum's advice column. She'd responded with platitudes about trusting your instincts and how her daughter was brave for walking away. Then I found the one that made me physically sick. A letter about a woman whose daughter had suffered a miscarriage at 12 weeks and how to support her through the grief. Every detail was accurate. How far along I'd been, that it was my first pregnancy, that I'd blamed myself, that I'd pushed my family away while processing the loss. My mum had taken the worst experience of my life and published it for strangers to read and judge. I printed out every column I recognized, highlighted the details that matched our real situations, made a folder thick with evidence of what she'd been doing. Then I drove to her house and confronted her. She was in her kitchen when I arrived, working on next week's columns. I dropped the folder on the table in front of her and asked her to explain. She looked confused at first, started flipping through the pages. Then her face changed. She got defensive immediately, said I was being paranoid, that advice columns were always based on common situations, that of course some things would sound familiar because family problems were universal. I pointed out specific details. The DUI was on the same date as Dad's. The eating disorder timeline matched Amy's hospitalization exactly. My miscarriage was the same week, same number of weeks pregnant. She couldn't claim coincidence when the details were that precise. She switched tactics, said it was therapeutic writing, that she changed enough details to make people unrecognizable, that nobody reading would know it was our family. Except I'd recognized us instantly. If I could, others could too. We lived in this town. People knew our family. My brother's divorce had been public enough that anyone paying attention would connect the dots. I asked her how she could monetize our trauma like this. She was getting paid for these columns, making money off our private struggles without our knowledge or consent. She tried to justify it by saying all writers draw from their lives, that she was helping people by sharing these experiences. But there's a difference between drawing inspiration and publishing your family's actual crises, barely disguised as anonymous letters. Then came the question that broke me. I asked if she'd ever actually received these letters, or if she'd just written them herself, pretending to be readers. She went quiet. That silence told me everything. She'd fabricated the letters, made up the writers, used our real situations and pretended strangers had written in asking for advice. The entire column was a fraud built on exploiting her own family. I told her I was sharing this with Kevin and Amy. She begged me not to, said it would hurt them to know that I should just let it go. But they deserved to know their mother had been publishing their private pain for a decade. I left her house and sent the folder to my siblings. Kevin's response was immediate rage. He called Mom and screamed at her for an hour about violating his privacy during the worst period of his life. Amy had a panic attack reading about her eating disorder in print. Seeing her struggle turned into an advice column topic. Both of them cut contact with Mom that day. I showed the columns to my dad. He'd had no idea she was writing about his alcoholism, about the DUI that had nearly cost him his job. He was humiliated. The trust in their marriage shattered. He moved out 2 weeks later. They're separated now, possibly heading for divorce. But that wasn't even the worst part. I sent copies of the columns to the newspaper, with a letter explaining that the columnist had been fabricating reader letters and writing about real people without their consent. The ethical violation was massive. Advice columns are supposed to be legitimate questions from real readers, not made-up scenarios using actual people's lives. The paper launched an investigation, checked Mum's email records, and found no incoming letters matching the columns I'd highlighted. She'd been making them up for years. They fired her immediately and pulled her column, published an apology to readers for running fabricated content. Her reputation in local journalism was destroyed. Other people started coming forward. A woman who recognized her own story in a column from 3 years ago about a contentious inheritance dispute. A man who saw his own divorce in a column my mum had written. Turns out she hadn't just been exploiting family. She'd been using stories from friends, acquaintances, people she knew through church, all of it published as anonymous letters, all of it real people's lives turned into content without permission. Things went from bad to unhinged when Mum tried to defend herself publicly. She did an interview with a competing paper, claiming she was being persecuted for her art, that all creative nonfiction blurs lines between fact and fiction. But she wasn't writing creative nonfiction. She was writing an advice column that explicitly presented itself as responding to real reader questions. The backlash was immediate and brutal. She lost friends. Her church group distanced themselves. She became a pariah in town, known as the columnist who exploited everyone around her for material. She tried to apologize to us individually, sent long emails explaining she never meant to hurt anyone, that she thought she was helping by sharing these experiences. But the apologies rang hollow. She'd had 10 years to consider the ethics of what she was doing, and chose money and minor local fame over our privacy. None of us have spoken to her in 8 months. She's tried showing up at our houses, sending gifts, leaving voicemails. Kevin got a restraining order after she wouldn't stop contacting him. Amy blocked her on everything. Dad's divorce attorney is using the columns as evidence of her character in the proceedings. I still see her sometimes around town. She looks smaller somehow, defeated. Part of me feels bad. She's my mother and she's lost her entire family over this. But then I remember reading about my miscarriage in the paper, seeing my most painful moment turned into a talking point for strangers, and the sympathy evaporates. The local paper eventually ran a feature about the scandal, how one columnist's deception had violated the trust of both readers and the people whose stories she'd stolen. They used it as a teaching moment about journalistic ethics. My mum became a cautionary tale. The thing she'd been most proud of, her column, her writing career, ended up being what destroyed her relationships with everyone she supposedly loved. She'd been so convinced she was helping people, providing valuable advice, that she never stopped to consider the people she was hurting. Us, her family, the ones who trusted her with our worst moments, only to find them published for public consumption. At least my mom's exploitation was in print. The next betrayal played out in real time for the world to see. My Aunt Carol had always been a little behind on technology. She just figured out how to use emojis last year and thought every text message needed to end with at least 3 of them. So when she announced at Sunday dinner that she was going to start a cooking show on Facebook Live, we were all supportive but skeptical. She'd been living with her roommate Linda for almost 30 years, and Linda was apparently going to be her co-host. Carol spent weeks preparing. She bought a ring light, a phone stand, recipe cards written in her neat handwriting. She practiced her introduction in front of the mirror. Linda helped her test the lighting and camera angles. It was actually kind of sweet how excited she was about this little project. The day of her first planned episode, Carol posted in the family group chat that she was doing a practice run and we shouldn't tune in yet. She wanted to make sure everything worked before going live for real. I was at work and didn't think much of it. Just liked her message and went back to my reports. About an hour later, my phone started blowing up. Messages from cousins, aunts, uncles, people I hadn't heard from in years, all saying the same thing. Are you watching this? Is this real? What's happening? I opened Facebook and saw that Carol's practice run wasn't a practice run at all. She'd accidentally gone live, and she'd left her phone recording on the counter, camera pointed at the kitchen, while she walked away. The live stream had been going for 47 minutes. Over 300 family members were watching. I jumped into the feed and my stomach dropped. Carol and Linda were sitting at the kitchen table, just outside the frame, their conversation picked up clearly by the phone's microphone. They were talking about their wills, about estate planning, about making sure if something happened to one of them, the other would be taken care of. Carol was saying she was tired of hiding, that 30 years was long enough, that she wanted to be able to hold Linda's hand at family gatherings without pretending they were just good friends. Linda was crying, saying she understood but was scared of losing the family they'd built relationships with over decades. Carol said maybe it was time to find out who really loved them and who just tolerated them. Then Linda said she wished they could get married. Actually married legally, not just the commitment ceremony they'd had in private 20 years ago that no one knew about. Carol agreed, said she wanted to introduce Linda as her wife, not her roommate. They talked about how exhausting it was maintaining the lie, how Carol's bedroom was actually her office, and she'd been sleeping in Linda's room for 3 decades, but they kept up the charade whenever family visited. The comment section was exploding. Some family members were supportive, saying they'd suspected for years and were happy Carol had someone who loved her. But most of the comments were from our conservative relatives, quoting scripture, saying they were disappointed, calling it a sin. My grandmother was typing in all caps demanding someone call her immediately. I watched the view count climb. 400 people, 500. Our entire extended family was watching this unfold in real time. Carol and Linda had no idea. They were still talking, getting more emotional, more honest. Carol said she regretted not being braver earlier, that she'd wasted so much energy hiding something that shouldn't have been shameful. Finally, about 50 minutes in, someone must have called Carol's phone because it started ringing. She walked over to grab it from the counter and saw that she was live. Her face went completely white. She looked at the view count, at the comments, and just froze. Linda came into frame asking what was wrong. Carol showed her the phone. Linda grabbed the edge of the counter to steady herself. Carol ended the stream without saying anything, but the damage was done. She'd accidentally come out to our entire extended family in the most public way possible. Within an hour, my grandmother had sent a message to the family group chat, calling an emergency family meeting at her house that evening. She said we needed to address the situation. I drove to the meeting not knowing what to expect. Carol and Linda were already there, sitting on the couch looking terrified. The living room filled up with relatives. My grandmother stood at the front like she was about to deliver a sermon. She started talking about family values, about what's acceptable, about how disappointed she was that Carol had been living in sin under their noses for 30 years. I'd heard enough. I stood up and cut her off, asked her how exactly Carol had wronged anyone by loving someone, pointed out that Linda had been at every family gathering for 3 decades, had brought food to sick relatives, had helped babysit kids, had been more present and supportive than half the people in this room. Asked what exactly was sinful about 2 people building a life together and being devoted to each other for longer than most marriages in our family lasted. My grandmother told me to sit down. I refused, said if we were disowning Carol and Linda for being happy, then we might as well disown everyone in this room who'd ever gotten divorced, had kids out of wedlock, or committed any of the other things the same scripture condemned. I looked at my uncle who was on his 3rd marriage. My cousin who'd had a baby at 17 asked if we were applying these rules equally or just when it was convenient. Here's where the room split. My mom stood up and walked over to stand next to me. Then my brother. A few cousins. Carol's sister, tears streaming down her face, got up and hugged Carol and Linda. Within minutes, about half the room had moved to show support. The other half sat there stone-faced or walked out completely. My grandmother said anyone who supported this lifestyle wasn't welcome in her home anymore. So we left, all of us. Walked out of that house and didn't look back. Carol was sobbing, kept apologizing for tearing the family apart. Linda was trying to comfort her while crying herself. I told them they hadn't torn anything apart. They'd just revealed what was already broken. The family fracture was immediate and total. Group chats split into 2, the supportive side and the condemning side. Holiday gatherings became separate events. My grandmother sent Carol a letter saying she was no longer welcome at family functions, and neither was anyone who defended her choices. 3 months later, Carol and Linda got legally married. Small ceremony, just the family members who'd stood by them. Carol wore a cream-colored dress and couldn't stop smiling. Linda's vows made everyone cry. During the reception, Carol gave a speech thanking everyone who'd chosen love over judgment. Said the accidental live stream was the best mistake she'd ever made because it forced her to stop hiding and find out who her real family was. I haven't spoken to my grandmother since that meeting. Haven't been to her house, haven't attended the gatherings she hosts. Neither have about 15 other family members who took Carol's side. We have our own holidays now, our own traditions. Honestly, they're better. Less tense, more authentic. Carol and Linda are thriving. They hold hands in public now. They introduce each other as wives. They travel together without having to book separate hotel rooms for appearances. Carol posts pictures of them on Facebook with captions about how grateful she is for her wife. Some of the condemning relatives have quietly reached out to apologize and rebuild relationships. Some never will. The whole thing taught me that sometimes families need to break to become healthier. That unconditional love isn't really unconditional if it comes with terms and conditions about who you're allowed to be. That 47 minutes of accidental honesty revealed 30 years of unnecessary hiding and decades more of conditional acceptance. Coming out can fracture families, but what about the lies that hold them together until everything falls apart? My cousin Whitney and I used to be close. We grew up together, did sleepovers as kids, were bridesmaids in each other's high school friends' weddings, the whole cousin bond thing. But somewhere in her mid-20s, she became obsessed with social media, built up this influencer lifestyle brand, constantly posting about her perfect life, her perfect relationship, her aesthetic apartment. Everything was content. When she got engaged, the wedding planning became her entire personality. She documented every decision, every vendor meeting, every dress fitting. Her followers ate it up. Then she announced it would be a destination wedding in Italy. Tuscany villa, week-long celebration, the works. Beautiful, sure, also wildly expensive. She sent out save the dates expecting everyone to just drop everything and spend thousands of dollars to attend. Flight, hotel, taking a week off work, wedding attire, gifts. I did the math and it came out to nearly $4,000. I just started a new job, was paying off student loans, living paycheck to paycheck like most people in their 20s. There was no way I could afford it. I called her to explain. Told her I was honored to be invited, but financially it wasn't possible for me right now. I offered to take her out for a nice dinner before she left, maybe throw her a small celebration when she got back. I thought I was being reasonable. She did not take it well. Whitney got cold on the phone, said if I really cared about her, I'd find a way to make it work, that other people were making sacrifices to be there, that this was the most important day of her life and I was choosing money over family. I tried to explain that it wasn't a choice, it was a financial reality, but she wasn't hearing it. The conversation ended badly. She said she was disappointed in me and hung up. We didn't talk much after that. I sent a gift when the wedding happened. She posted photos that got thousands of likes. Life moved on. I figured we'd eventually patch things up, that she'd cool down and realize she'd been unreasonable. Months went by with minimal contact. Then one morning I woke up to my phone exploding. Text messages from friends, missed calls, DMs on every platform. Someone had tagged me in a Twitter thread that was blowing up. I opened it and felt my stomach drop. Whitney had posted a long thread about me. Never used my full name, but used my first name, and enough identifying details that anyone who knew us would know exactly who she was talking about. The thread was titled, "A Thread About Toxic People Who Pretend to Care About You." She painted me as this selfish, narcissistic person who'd abandoned her during the most important time of her life. She included screenshots of our text conversations, carefully cropped and taken out of context to make me look terrible. One screenshot showed me saying I couldn't afford the wedding, but she'd cropped out the part where I'd offered alternatives and explained my financial situation. It just looked like I'd said no without explanation. Another showed me declining to go dress shopping with her, but cropped out the context that it was during a work week and I'd offered to go the following weekend. Everything was framed to make me seem callous and uncaring. The thread went viral, 20,000 retweets in the first 6 hours. Comments flooded in calling me terrible names, saying I was a garbage person, a fake friend, toxic, selfish. People were finding my social media accounts and sending me hate messages. Death threats started coming in. Actual death threats over a wedding I didn't attend. The internet had decided I was the villain based entirely on Whitney's carefully curated narrative. I was panicking. My reputation was being destroyed in real time by thousands of strangers who knew nothing about me. I thought about responding, but everyone who tried to defend me in the comments got attacked too. The mob had decided I was guilty, and nothing was going to change their minds. Then something interesting happened. Someone on Twitter, a stranger who'd been analyzing the screenshots, noticed something Whitney had missed. In one of the images, she'd forgotten to crop the top of her screen properly. You could see just the edge of another text conversation, a group chat. The contact names were visible at the top. This person zoomed in and screenshot it, posted it asking what the group chat was about. Other people started examining the original image more closely. Someone with photo editing skills enhanced it. What they found was devastating for Whitney. The group chat was between Whitney and three of her friends. The visible message preview at the top of the screen, the part she'd forgotten to crop out, showed them discussing me. One message said, "Okay, so if we post the screenshots like this, it'll make her look worse." Another said, "We need to make sure everyone hates her." A third said, "This is going to ruin her reputation." She'd accidentally included evidence of the entire smear campaign being coordinated. The screenshots weren't just her venting to friends, they were strategically edited and posted as part of a planned attack, designed specifically to destroy my reputation. And she'd been dumb enough to leave proof of it in her own viral thread. The discovery spread faster than the original thread. People started sharing the evidence, zooming in on the group chat preview, posting about how Whitney had orchestrated the whole thing. The narrative flipped instantly. Comments that had been attacking me were now attacking her. People were calling her manipulative, cruel, a liar. I screenshot everything. The enhanced image showing the group chat, Whitney's original thread, examples of the harassment I'd received, put together my own thread with full context, posted the complete uncropped versions of our text conversations showing what she'd deliberately left out, explained the financial situation, the pressure I'd been under, how I'd tried to maintain our relationship despite not being able to attend the wedding. My thread got even more attention than hers had. The internet loves watching someone get caught in their own trap. News outlets picked it up. Online drama channels made videos about it. Whitney became a cautionary tale about the dangers of cancel culture and weaponizing social media. Then came the fallout for her. Her influencer sponsorship started dropping her. Brands don't want to be associated with someone who's been exposed coordinating harassment campaigns. Her wedding planner, who she'd been working with for an upcoming brand collaboration, publicly cut ties with her. Her follower count started dropping as people unfollowed in droves. Someone made a compilation of her contradictions, and it went viral. Clips of her preaching about kindness and authenticity, juxtaposed with evidence of her plotting to ruin my reputation. She became known online as Cancel Culture Karen, a meme representing people who try to destroy others on social media and end up destroying themselves. Whitney tried to apologize, posted a Notes app screenshot saying she'd made a mistake, that she was hurt and lashed out, that she'd learned and grown. But the apology rang hollow. You don't accidentally coordinate a smear campaign. You don't accidentally edit screenshots to remove context. You don't accidentally plot with friends about ruining someone's reputation. It was all deliberate until she got caught. Her friend group imploded too. The friends who'd been in that group chat got exposed and faced their own backlash. One of them apparently felt guilty and leaked more screenshots showing the full extent of their planning. They discussed the best time to post for maximum engagement, which screenshots to use, how to phrase things to make me look worst. It was calculated and cruel. The wedding she'd been so obsessed with that had started this whole mess became tainted by the scandal. People commented on her wedding photos, bringing up the drama. She eventually archived most of her Instagram posts, trying to escape it, but the internet doesn't forget. I got my life back relatively quickly. Once the truth came out, the harassment stopped. People apologized for jumping to conclusions. Some of the hate messages turned into messages of support. My employer, who'd been concerned about the initial thread, saw the full story and was satisfied I'd done nothing wrong. Whitney and I haven't spoken since. Our family is awkward about it. Some relatives think I should forgive her. That family is family. Others think what she did was unforgivable. Holiday gatherings are tense when we're both there. We avoid each other entirely. The whole experience taught me how dangerous social media can be as a weapon, how easy it is to manipulate narratives, to turn thousands of strangers against someone with carefully edited screenshots and emotional appeals. Whitney tried to use that power to destroy me because I couldn't afford her destination wedding. Instead, she destroyed herself by being careless with her own evidence. Social media can be a weapon, but sometimes the most devastating revelations arrive from complete strangers. I was sitting at my desk around 3 in the afternoon when our office receptionist brought me an unmarked manila envelope. She said someone had dropped it off for me but hadn't left a name. No return address on the envelope, just my name and the office address written in block letters. I figured it was maybe a client sending documents, opened it without thinking much about it. Inside were printed photos, maybe 20 of them, all of my partner Chris with another man. Not casual friend photos. These were intimate, holding hands, walking down a street, kissing outside a restaurant, entering a hotel together, leaving the same hotel the next morning. The timestamps on the photos were from last weekend, the same weekend Chris had told me he was at a work conference in Boston. My hands were shaking. I spread the photos across my desk, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. There were also hotel receipts, printed copies showing a room booked under Chris's name at a boutique hotel downtown. Not in Boston. Here, in our city. The same dates he'd supposedly been out of town. At the bottom of the envelope was a flash drive. No label, just a standard black USB drive. I plugged it into my computer and found folders organized by date. Months of surveillance footage, videos of Chris meeting this same man at cafes, bars, hotels. The footage went back 6 months, half a year of secret meetings I'd known nothing about. I sat there staring at my screen, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. We'd been together for 4 years, lived together for 2. I'd thought we were solid, happy, planning a future. And this entire time he'd been seeing someone else, meeting him regularly while lying to me about where he was and who he was with. I tried to figure out who sent this, checked the envelope for any identifying marks. The postage stamp showed it had been mailed locally 2 days ago, but the return address was obviously fake. It listed an apartment number at a building I knew didn't exist on that street. I tried to trace the IP metadata on the files from the flash drive, but got nowhere. Whoever sent this knew how to cover their tracks. That evening, Chris came home from work like it was a normal day, asked how my day was, started talking about what we should order for dinner. I interrupted him and asked how the conference in Boston had gone. He said it was productive, boring, the usual corporate stuff. Just kept lying to my face without hesitation. I put the envelope on the kitchen table, told him he should look inside, watched his expression change as he opened it and saw the photos. He went completely pale, didn't try to deny it, didn't make excuses, just asked quietly where I'd gotten this. I told him someone had sent it to me anonymously, asked if he wanted to explain or if the photos spoke for themselves. He sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs and started talking. The other man was his ex-boyfriend from college. They'd reconnected about 8 months ago at an alumni event, started meeting up for coffee to catch up. The coffee meetings turned into something more. Chris said he'd been planning to leave me but couldn't find the right time. Kept putting it off because he didn't want to hurt me, didn't know how to have the conversation, so instead he just lived a double life. Lied about work trips and late meetings while maintaining a relationship with someone else. The cowardice of it was almost worse than the cheating. I asked if he loved this other man. Chris said he didn't know, that he was confused, that he loved me too, but something was missing. All the typical cliches people use when they're trying to justify betrayal. I told him to pack a bag and leave. He tried to argue, said we should talk about this, go to counseling, but I was done. I gave him an hour to get his essential stuff and told him to arrange a time to pick up the rest when I wasn't home. After he left, I went through the flash drive more carefully. The surveillance was extensive. Whoever had compiled this had been following Chris for months. They knew his schedule, the places he frequented, when and where he met his ex. The level of detail was almost unsettling. This wasn't casual observation. Someone had invested serious time and resources into documenting Chris's affair. For weeks, I tried to figure out who sent it. I made lists of people who might have known. Chris's friends, co-workers, my co-workers, neighbors. I couldn't think of anyone who'd have the motivation or means to conduct this kind of surveillance. I checked security footage from my office building to see who'd dropped off the envelope, but the cameras had a blind spot at the reception desk. I asked Chris if he had any idea who might have exposed him. He claimed he didn't, seemed genuinely confused about it. His ex hadn't known about me, apparently, thought Chris was single. So it wasn't a jealous rival trying to break us up. The mystery sender remained completely anonymous. Then, about 6 weeks after I'd received the envelope, I got a text from an unknown number. Just one line, "You deserve to know. Don't look for me." I tried calling the number immediately, but it was disconnected. Tried texting back, but the messages didn't deliver. Whoever it was had used a burner phone and disposed of it after sending that single message. I never found out who sent the evidence, never discovered their identity or their motivation, but they saved me from wasting more years on a relationship built on lies. If they hadn't intervened, I might still be with Chris, oblivious to his double life, making plans for a future that was never real. Chris tried to reconcile a few times, sent long emails about how he'd made a mistake, how he wanted to work things out, how he'd ended things with his ex. But I couldn't trust him. The lying had been too extensive, too calculated. He hadn't just cheated, he'd maintained an elaborate deception for months. Every work trip, every late night, every time he'd looked me in the eye and lied about where he'd been. The relationship with his ex didn't last. I heard through mutual friends that they'd broken up a few months after I kicked Chris out. Apparently, when the relationship wasn't secret and forbidden anymore, it lost its appeal. Chris ended up alone, having destroyed what we had for something that imploded almost immediately. I moved on eventually, dated other people, but I'm more cautious now, more aware that people can live double lives with shocking ease. That someone can kiss you goodnight and lie about where they were that afternoon without any visible guilt. The paranoia faded over time but never completely disappeared. The mysterious sender crosses my mind sometimes. I wonder if they were someone close to the situation, someone who knew both of us and couldn't stand watching the deception continue. Or maybe a private investigator hired by someone else for different reasons who stumbled onto Chris's affair and decided I should know. Or a stranger who'd witnessed something and felt compelled to collect evidence and expose the truth. I'll probably never know, but whoever they were, whatever their reason, they gave me the information I needed to make an informed choice about my life. They could have stayed silent, let me continue in ignorance. Instead, they went to considerable effort and expense to document the truth and deliver it to me anonymously. Part of me wishes I could thank them, tell them that while the truth was devastating, it was better than living a lie. That discovering the betrayal when I did saved me from discovering it years later, maybe after marriage or kids, had made everything more complicated. They freed me from a relationship that was already over, I just hadn't known it yet. The unmarked envelope ended my relationship, but started my path towards something honest. And sometimes that's what truth does. It destroys what's built on lies, so something real can grow in its place. And that's where we'll leave this particular rabbit hole of Reddit chaos. 15 stories of secrets, lies, and the explosive moments when truth finally breaks through. If you've made it this far, you're clearly as fascinated by the messy reality of human nature as I am. Sweet dreams, everyone, and remember, the truth always finds a way out. Whether through security footage, accidental live streams, or mysterious strangers with unmarked envelopes. Sometimes the exposure we fear most is exactly what we need. Sleep well, and I'll see you in the next video.